The first thing I'm aware of is the cold. A deep internal chill that has nothing to do with the thin hospital blanket. Then, the fog. A thick, cottony haze that muffles sound and smears the edges of the fluorescent lights above into starbursts. My mouth feels like it's been stuffed with desert sand. I try to swallow, and it's a painful, grating effort. A shape swims into focus beside me. Mark, my son. His face is pale, washed out under the harsh glare, making the freckles he inherited from his mother stand out like scattered constellations. He looks shattered. His eyes are red-rimmed, and he's clutching my hand, his grip almost painfully tight. "Dad?" His voice is a hoarse whisper, cutting through the anesthetic haze. "You're awake. Thank God." I try to form a word to ask about the surgery, but all that comes out is a dry croak. He understands. He's always been a good boy, my Mark. Sensitive, maybe too sensitive for his own good. "The doctor said it went well," he says, his words coming in a rushed, nervous tumble. "They got it all. You just have to rest now." He pats my hand, a gesture meant to be comforting, but it feels frantic. His gaze keeps darting towards the door, then back to me. He's holding something back. I can feel it, a heavy, unspoken thing hanging in the sterile air between us. I manage to rasp out a single word. "Lena?" It's our old joke. For a moment after any major event, good or bad, I'd ask for her, my beautiful Lena, just to hear him say she was fine, that she was waiting for me. It was our ritual, a touchstone to the life we built. But the joke dies the second it leaves my lips. The memory of her absence, now 2 years old, crashes back into the room, colder and more real than any surgical anesthetic. Mark's face crumples. He looks down at our joined hands, and a single tear tracks through the stubble on his cheek. "Dad, I have to tell you something." The dread that had been a low hum in my veins suddenly sharpens into a spike of pure ice. This isn't about the surgery. This is something else, something worse. He takes a shaky breath, his shoulders slumping as if the weight of the world has just settled on them. "While you were in here, Sarah, she..." He can't seem to get the words out. My mind, still sluggish, tries to fill in the blanks. An accident? Something with the grandkids? "Sarah sold the beach house." The words leave his mouth, simple and declarative, but they don't make any sense. They are just sounds, syllables that bounce off the fog in my brain without connecting. Sold. The beach house. I parse each word individually, like a child learning to read. The beach house. It isn't just a house. It's the scent of salt and pine. It's the feel of sun-warmed wood under my bare feet. It's the memory of Lena's laughter echoing off the vaulted ceiling we built together, board by board, nail by nail. It's the view of the endless Pacific from our bedroom window, a view she painted a dozen times. It's the very floorboards she walked on, the kitchen where she cooked our meals, the bedroom where she took her last peaceful breath, her hand in mine as the ocean whispered outside. That house, our house, the one I built for her, sold. And then the final devastating piece of the puzzle clicks into place with a sound I can almost hear. While you were under the knife, the betrayal isn't just emotional, it's a physical force, a sucker punch to my soul that steals the air from my lungs more effectively than any tube they put down my throat. The surgical wound in my side screams in protest as my entire body goes rigid. This wasn't an opportunistic sale. This was a calculated act. They waited. They knew I would be helpless, unconscious, defenseless. My own son sat vigil by my bedside, holding this secret, while his wife, my daughter-in-law, was across town, signing away my past, my love, my last tangible connection to Lena. The papers were signed while a stranger's hands were inside my body trying to cut out the cancer. And they were performing their own kind of surgery, weren't they? cutting out the heart of my history, severing me from my own life, thinking I was too old, too sick, too weak to fight back. The grogginess vanishes, burned away by a white-hot fury so pure it's almost cleansing. The cold I felt upon waking is gone, replaced by a fire that feels like it could melt the very metal of this hospital bed. I look at my son, at his tear-streaked face, and I don't see my boy anymore. I see an accomplice. I see a coward. I don't say a word. I just turn my head away from him, my gaze fixing on the blank, white wall. But inside the foundations of my world, the quiet, retired life I had so carefully constructed have just been dynamited. And rising from the smoke and rubble is someone they've all forgotten, someone they never should have awakened. The silence in this house is a living thing. It doesn't just exist, it presses in. Before the surgery, it was a comfortable, quiet, the kind filled with memories. Now it's hollow, empty. It's the sound of a space waiting for a person who will never walk through the door again, and the sound of two people who should be here but aren't. My son and his wife. They think I'm just sitting here, stewing in my hurt. They have no idea. I move from the armchair to the kitchen, the journey feeling longer than it is. My body aches, a deep surgical throb, but it's a dull sensation compared to the raw, clean cut of the betrayal. Sarah sold the house, Lena's house, our house. I keep waiting for the anger to come, a red-hot rage that would be so much easier to handle, but it doesn't. Instead, there's this cold weight, a profound sense of being erased. They see an old man. That's all. They see Grandpa Leo, the guy who tells long, rambling stories they've heard a dozen times, the one who fusses over his tomato plants like they're his children and who still gets his newspaper delivered because he likes the feel of the ink on his fingers. They see the man I became, the man Lena helped me become, and they think that's all there is. They've forgotten the man I was before her, or maybe they never really knew him. Before Lena, I wasn't Leo the grandfather, I was Leo, the Landman Volkov. The name itself sounds foreign to me now, a relic from another lifetime. It wasn't a nickname given in affection. It was a title earned in bloodless battles, fought in wood-paneled courtrooms and through mountains of deliberately obtuse legal documents. I didn't just build houses. I understood the very ground they stood on in a way that made powerful developers and corporations nervous. My specialty was land rights, title disputes, the labyrinthine and often brutal world of property law. I could find a single missing signature on a century-old plat map and use it to unravel a multi-million-dollar development deal. I could trace water rights and mineral rights and easements with the cold, detached precision of a surgeon. It was a cutthroat world, a game of intellectual chess where the prize was dirt and concrete, and the power that came with it. I was good at it, ruthlessly good. I built a reputation not on charm, but on a formidable, unblinking comprehension of the law and a willingness to use it like a scalpel. The Landman was a warning. It meant I owned the board before the other players even knew the game had begun. And then I met Lena. She saw the man buried under all that ambition and cold strategy. She saw the toll it was taking, the hollowed-out soul inside the successful suit. She didn't ask me to change. She simply showed me a different way to live. She asked me to build her a house, a real home by the ocean. Not for a client, for us. And I did. I left the courtrooms and the corporate warfare behind. I traded my briefcase for a toolbox and my custom suits for a pair of worn-out jeans. I poured every bit of the intensity I'd once used to dissect legal precedent into mixing concrete and sanding floorboards by hand. The beach house was my penance and my rebirth. It was the first and only thing I ever built that was filled with love, not litigation. I created Grandpa Leo for her. It was the greatest and most satisfying role of my life. Now, sitting in this oppressive quiet, I can feel him stirring. The Landman. It's not a welcome feeling. It's like an old heavy coat I thought I'd donated, suddenly found hanging in the back of the closet. The fabric is familiar, but it smells of a life I consciously abandoned. They think my silence is grief. They think my stillness is weakness. They have no idea that my mind, dormant for so long, is beginning to turn over, slowly, like a massive engine that hasn't been started in years. The gears are rusty, but they're there. And I know with a certainty that settles the cold weight in my chest into something solid and purposeful, that the deed to the land, the actual physical dirt upon which our beach house was built, is not in some file in Sarah's office. It's not listed in the paperwork she so arrogantly sold. It's right where it's always been. A relic from that past life, a final fundamental piece of the man I used to be, sitting securely in my safe deposit box at the bank downtown. They sold the house, but they never owned the land. They forgot to ask the Landman. The hydrangeas by the front walk were just starting to bloom, the big fluffy blue heads that Lena had loved so much. I was on my knees in the dirt, not because the weeds were bad, but because the feel of the soil under my fingers was the only thing that felt real. The pain from the surgery was a dull, distant throb, but the hole where the beach house used to be in my life was a raw, open wound. I heard the car pull into the driveway before I saw it. Not Mark's sensible sedan, a low-slung silver sports car that looked like it was compensating for something. The door opened and Sarah stepped out, all sharp angles and business casual. And then I saw him, a man in a suit that cost more than my first car, his hair so perfectly gelled it looked like a helmet. He had that used car salesman's smile already plastered on his face, the one that doesn't reach the eyes. And then, finally, my son. Mark got out of the passenger side, his shoulders slumped, his eyes fixed on the ground as if he were studying the molecular structure of the pavement. My hands, covered in dirt, stilled. I didn't get up. Let them come to me. Let them walk through Lena's garden. "Leo, we were in the neighborhood," Sarah chirped, her voice like broken glass wrapped in silk. She gestured to the man. "This is Chad. He's been such a help with the beach house transaction." Chad thrust a hand toward me. I looked at my own, black with earth, and then back at his. He retracted it smoothly, as if he'd just decided to adjust his tie. "A pleasure, sir. Sarah has told me so much about you." I said nothing. I just watched my son, who was still examining his shoes. "We thought we'd come by and discuss the future," Sarah continued, her smile unwavering. She walked right up to the edge of my flower bed, her high heels sinking into the soft mulch. "Now that the beach house is sold, it's really about maximizing all our assets, freeing up capital." The words were so sterile, so hollow. Assets. Capital. She was talking about the place where Lena had painted the shutters, sea foam green because she said it matched the ocean on a cloudy day. The place where we'd grilled fish on the porch and listened to the waves for 30 summers. "Our new venture needs a significant injection," she went on, and I could see the feverish gleam in her eyes. It was ambition, pure and unadulterated, and it had completely erased any scrap of family loyalty. "Mark's tech startup is poised to explode, Leo. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity." That's when she did it. She reached into her expensive leather portfolio and pulled out a check. She held it out to me, pinched between two manicured fingers, as if she were offering a treat to a dog she wasn't sure was house-trained. "This is your share," she said, her voice dropping into what she must have thought was a respectful, solemn tone. "We want it to be fair." I didn't take it. I let my eyes drop to the amount. It was a number that was insulting. It wasn't just a fraction of the property's true value. It was a pittance. It was a number that said, We know you're old and we know you don't understand modern finance, so just take this and be quiet." The silence stretched. A bee buzzed lazily around the hydrangeas. Chad cleared his throat. "It's a very strong seller's market right now," he offered, trying to fill the void. "We got you a very competitive price." That's when my eyes finally lifted from the check and locked onto Sarah's. "You sold my wife's house," I said, my voice low and steady, devoid of the tremor I felt inside. She actually had the nerve to look exasperated, a little sigh escaping her lips. "Leo, it's just a house. You have to stop being so sentimental. It's just wood and nails. It's time to move on." Just a house. The words hung in the air, more offensive than any curse. It was the place Lena took her last breath, looking out at the sea she loved. It was the place our son learned to swim. It was every memory we'd ever built, the physical manifestation of our life together. And to her, it was just an asset to be liquidated for her new venture. My gaze shifted to Mark. He was standing a few feet behind her, a silent, pale shadow. He wouldn't meet my eyes. His hands were shoved deep in his pockets, his entire posture screaming of shame and cowardice. This was the boy I taught to throw a spiral, the young man I'd stood beside at his wedding, and now he was letting his wife dismantle his mother's legacy for a shot at a Silicon Valley fantasy. He was a ghost. The man I raised was gone, and this hollowed-out stranger was all that was left. I looked back down at my hands, at the rich, dark soil clinging to the lines of my skin. I thought of another kind of dirt, the sandy soil of the beach house lot, and the feel of a trowel in my hand as I helped mix the concrete for the foundation. Sarah was still holding the check. When it became clear I wasn't going to take it, she bent over, her movements stiff with irritation, and placed it on the stone bench next to the walkway. "Think about it, Leo," she said, her voice losing its fake sweetness. "It's done. This is what's best for the family's future." They turned and walked back to the obscene silver car. Chad was already on his phone. Sarah was talking at Mark, her head tilted, no doubt explaining reality to him. He just nodded, got in the car, and never once looked back at me. I stayed on my knees in the garden long after the sound of their engine had faded. The check sat on the bench, a bright white flag of surrender I had no intention of picking up. The insult of it wasn't the amount. It was the act itself. They hadn't just taken something from me. They had tried to buy me off, to pay me to forget. And as I sat there, surrounded by the flowers my wife had planted, the first cold, hard ember of something I hadn't felt in decades began to glow in the pit of my stomach. It wasn't grief, it wasn't even anger anymore. It was a quiet, focused, and utterly terrifying sense of purpose. The silence in my living room was a heavy, woolen blanket. It was the kind of quiet that wasn't peaceful, but waiting. I'd been sitting in my armchair for what felt like hours, maybe minutes. Time had become a strange, syrupy substance since Sarah and Chad, the human embodiment of a used car commercial, had left. The check she'd given me, that insultingly small piece of paper that was supposed to represent my life with Lena, lay on the coffee table where she'd placed it. I hadn't touched it. It felt contaminated. My eyes drifted, as they always did, to the mantelpiece, to the silver frame, to her. It was our beach house photo, not a picture of the finished product, all painted and perfect, but one from the very end of the build. We were standing in front of the raw concrete foundation, both of us covered in a fine layer of dust. My arm was around her shoulders. Her hand was resting on the cool, rough concrete of the foundation wall. Her smile was brighter than the California sun glinting off the ocean behind us. I remembered the feel of her hand in mine, the smell of sawdust and salt air, the sound of her laugh as I pretended to lose my hammer for the 10th time that day, just to hear it. I built that foundation. Not a crew, not a subcontractor, me. Leo Volkov. I'd mixed the concrete in a rented mixer, my muscles screaming in protest, my back a knot of pure fire. I'd built the wooden forms, measured and remeasured, ensuring everything was perfectly level, perfectly square. I'd poured that grey slurry into the trenches I'd dug, smoothing the top with a trowel until it was like glass. Lena had brought me lemonade, sitting on an upturned bucket, reading a book aloud to me as I worked. That foundation wasn't just a slab of concrete. It was a day, a week, a month of our lives poured into the earth. It was the physical manifestation of our promise to each other, a promise to build a new life, a quieter life, from the ground up, and the land. God, the land. We'd found the plot by accident, a forgotten stretch that everyone else thought was too rocky, too difficult. But I saw its potential. I saw the way the light hid it in the afternoon. I navigated the labyrinth of permits and zoning, called in favors from a past I was trying to leave behind, and secured the title. It was my land, our land. The house was the dream, but the land was the bedrock. It was the one thing I never let go of. Sarah sold the house. The words echoed in the silent room, but this time they didn't just hurt. This time they shifted. They rearranged themselves into a new, terrifying clarity. She didn't just sell the house. She stood in my living room, in the home I'd shared with Lena for 30 years, and she presented me with a check. She called me sentimental. She told me it was time to move on. She looked at me, at the man who had held her children, who had welcomed her into this family, and she saw a feeble old man, a relic, a piece of furniture to be cleared out to make space for her new shiny life. She saw Grandpa Leo, the puttering gardener. She never saw Leo the landman, Volkov. She tried to erase a legacy. She thought she could take a photograph off a mantelpiece and toss it in the trash. She thought she could pour the concrete of our memories into a dumpster. She thought the foundation of a life could be bulldozed to make way for a bigger deck or a hot tub. And that's when I heard it. It wasn't a loud sound. It wasn't a crack of thunder or a shattering of glass. It was a soft, precise, final sound. The sound of a lock engaging. A door, long closed and rusted shut, swinging open on silent, well-oiled hinges inside my mind. The grief, the shock, the raw, wounded feeling of betrayal. It didn't vanish. It was still there, a cold, hard stone in my gut, but it was no longer in charge. Something else was rising to meet it, something I hadn't felt in 2 decades. It was a cold, analytical focus. It was the part of me that could look at a complex title report and see the one weak clause, the single missing signature that could bring a multi-million-dollar deal to its knees. It was the part of me that understood that sentiment was a luxury and war was fought with paperwork, precedent, and ruthless precision. The Landman wasn't dead. He'd just been sleeping, and he was now very quietly wide awake. He looked out from behind my eyes at the photograph of the woman he loved, at the foundation he built, and he began to calculate. The game had changed. She just didn't know it yet. The silence in my study was a thick, tangible thing. It was the kind of quiet that amplified the faint hum of the refrigerator downstairs and the slow, deliberate tick of the grandfather clock Lena had picked out at a flea market a lifetime ago. For weeks that silence had felt like a prison, a constant reminder of my isolation, but tonight it felt different. It felt like an ally. I knelt, my knee joints complaining with a familiar ache, and spun the dial on the old floor safe. The clicks were soft, metallic whispers in the stillness. The door swung open with a heavy, satisfying thud. Inside, nestled among a few old passports and Lena's jewelry box, was a long, legal-sized envelope, its cream-colored paper gone slightly brittle with age. I pulled it out. The deed. It felt heavier than I remembered, not in physical weight, but in consequence. It was the weight of history, of sweat, of promises made under a wide-open sky. Settling into my worn leather chair, I spread the document on the desk. The lamplight caught the raised notary seal glinting off the formal typeset letters. Leo Volkov, sole owner. I ran my thumb over my name. Leo Volkov. For so long I had just been Leo, Grandpa Leo, the man who grew heirloom tomatoes and told long, rambling stories. They had forgotten, or perhaps they had never truly known, the man whose name was on this paper. Leo the Landman Volkov. A strange sensation began in the back of my mind, a faint, distant grinding like a great engine that had been cold for decades, slowly turning over. It was my mind, rusted from years of peaceful disuse, shuddering back to life. Concepts and precedents, buried under layers of retirement and grief, began to stir like ghosts from a past I'd willingly sealed away. I remembered the intricacies of severing land from structure. It was a niche, almost arcane area of property law I'd mastered, a tool for developers and corporations looking to maximize profit, to untether a building from the very earth it stood on. I'd been a virtuoso of that particular brand of legal severance, and then, clear as a bell in the quiet room, the old Latin phrase surfaced from the depths: Cuius est solum, eius est usque ad coelum et ad inferos. Who owns the land, owns it all the way to the heavens and all the way to the depths. It was the foundational principle, the unshakable truth of real property. Sarah had sold the house, but the house was just a thing, a collection of wood and nails and memory. She had never owned the ground it was rooted in. She never even thought to ask. The memory of the gift was crystalline. When Mark married Sarah, I wanted to give them a foundation, a place to start their life together, just as Lena and I had. I'd signed over the house, a simple, heartfelt gift. But the land was different. The land was mine and Lena's. It was the first patch of dirt we'd stood on together, dreaming of the future. Transferring the land would have felt like giving away a part of her, a part of us. So I'd kept it. It was a sentimental gesture, a quiet, private act of love for my late wife. I never imagined that sentimental gesture would become a legal fortress. And that's when the plan began to form. It didn't arrive in a flash of rage or a surge of emotion. It unfolded with a cold, terrifying precision, like a blueprint being drawn by an unseen hand in my mind. This wouldn't be a confrontation. There would be no shouting, no slammed doors, no messy, emotional pleas. Those were the weapons of the weak, the desperate. Sarah had operated in the shadows of legality, using my vulnerability as her cover. I would answer her in a language she thought she understood but had never truly spoken, the cold, unassailable language of the law. I saw it all, laid out before me with the clarity of a chess master seeing 10 moves ahead. The quiet title action to reassert my ownership publicly and irrevocably. The liens to freeze the property, to turn her asset into a legal anchor around her neck. The direct factual communication with a new owner, a man who had paid good money for a beautiful lie. Sarah thought she was a shrewd businesswoman. She thought she was dealing with a feeble, sentimental old man. She had no idea she was poking a sleeping predator with a stick. The Landman was awake now, and he wasn't here to argue. He was here to dismantle, piece by legal piece, the entire edifice of her arrogant betrayal. This wouldn't be a fight. It would be an annihilation. A quiet, methodical, and utterly complete legal annihilation. And for the first time since I'd woken up from that anesthesia, a sense of calm, icy purpose settled over me. The game was on. The rage had cooled. It didn't vanish, but it transformed, hardening in my chest from a hot, blinding fire into something cold and dense, like a black diamond. It was no longer an emotion, it was a tool, and I knew exactly which tool to pick up first. I didn't go to one of those glass and chrome law firms downtown. They deal in contracts and negotiations. I needed a declaration of war. I needed Evelyn. Finding her number was like exhuming a relic. It was in a small, leather-bound address book the kind no one uses anymore, tucked in the back of my safe. The paper was yellowed, the ink slightly faded. I dialed the number from my landline, the rotary dial making a satisfying, deliberate click with each turn. She answered on the second ring. No greeting, just a silent waiting line. "Evelyn, it's Leo Volkov." There was a pause, then a low, familiar chuckle. "The Landman. I heard you'd gone soft, retired, built a house with your own 2 hands." "I did," I said, my voice flat. "And someone is trying to take it from me. My daughter-in-law." Another pause, this one more calculating. "Family disputes are messy." "This isn't a dispute, it's an extermination. And I need an exterminator who understands the terrain." She was quiet for a moment, and I could almost hear the gears turning in her formidable mind. "Tell me," she said, and I did. I laid it out, not with the raw hurt of a grandfather, but with the cold, precise facts of a landman. The original deed, the severance of land from structure, the gift of the house, the brazen sale while I was under anesthesia. When I finished, she simply said, "I'll be there in 2 hours." She looked exactly the same. Time had etched a few more lines around her eyes, but her gaze was just as sharp, her posture just as rigid. She wore a severe, dark pantsuit and carried a briefcase that looked like it could stop a bullet. We sat in my study, the same room where Lena and I used to read by the fire. Now it was a war room. "The beach house land," I began, unlocking the safe and handing her the deed. She didn't even look at it. "I know what it says. You told me on the phone. The first move is a quiet title action. We go to the court, present your deed, and formally, legally, assert your sole ownership. We do it ex parte for now. No need to tip our hand to the other side. We establish the baseline fact on the record that you are the undisputed owner of that parcel of land. It's the foundation. Everything else we build will rest on that." I nodded. It was the correct surgical first cut. Isolate the asset. Claim what is yours without fanfare. "The second move," Evelyn continued, pulling a pre-drafted document from her briefcase, "is a lien. We file it immediately after the quiet title action is processed. We'll call it a claim for unauthorized use and trespass upon real property. It's aggressive but legally sound. The moment this lien is recorded against the property, it's frozen. The new owner cannot sell it, cannot refinance it, cannot even get a permit to so much as repaint the shutters. It becomes a toxic asset, legally paralyzed. He owns a beautiful, expensive box that he can't touch and he can't get rid of." A grim satisfaction settled over me. This was no longer about hurt feelings. This was about systems, about levers and pressure points. Sarah thought she was playing Monopoly. She didn't realize the board she was playing on had trapdoors. "And the third move?" I asked, though I already knew. Evelyn allowed herself a thin, razor-like smile. "The third move is the letter. We don't contact Sarah or your son. They are irrelevant now. They are the middlemen who sold a product they didn't fully own. We go straight to the end user. The new owner, a Mr. Julian Thorne." She produced another document. It was several pages long, single-spaced. "This letter," she said, tapping it with a perfectly manicured finger, "will be a masterpiece. It will be cordial, professional, and utterly devastating. It will begin by congratulating him on his recent purchase. It will then, with painstaking detail and citations to case law you and I helped shape 30 years ago, explain to him that he has been the victim of a profound misrepresentation. He has purchased a structure, a building. He has not purchased, and has no legal right to, the land upon which it sits. We will explain the principle of ad coelum to the heavens and to the depths. We will outline the quiet title action we have already filed and the lien we have already placed. We will make it abundantly clear that he is not a homeowner. He is a trespasser on my client's land." I read the draft she handed me. It was brutal in its clarity. It didn't threaten, it simply stated facts, laying them out like a coroner's report. It was the legal equivalent of showing a man a picture of his own skeleton. He's a tech entrepreneur, I mused, used to systems, to logic. He'll understand this immediately. He won't get angry with us. He'll be furious with the people who sold him a broken product. Precisely, Evelyn said, gathering her papers. We are not the villains in his story. We are the bearers of unfortunate but critical truth. We are the ones who have revealed the fatal flaw in his acquisition. His rage will have a target, and it will not be you. I signed the documents she put in front of me. My hand was steady. The pen felt familiar in my grip, not like a gardening trowel or a hammer, but like the weapon it had once been. We were not starting a fight. We were ending one. With 3 silent, paper-based moves, we had just checkmated my daughter-in-law, and she didn't even know the game had begun. The Landman was back, and his first order of business was to reclaim his ground. The phone rang with the shrill, insistent tone of an emergency. I was in my study, the quiet hum of the afternoon, my only companion. I'd been expecting this call. I let it ring 3 times, a small, deliberate pause to let the tension on the other end of the line coil just a little tighter. I picked up the receiver. Hello? What came through the earpiece wasn't a voice. It was a raw, tearing sound, a vortex of panic and rage. What did you do? Sarah shrieked, the words distorted, barely intelligible. What in God's name did you do? I settled back in my leather chair, the old springs groaning in a familiar, comforting way. I said nothing. I just let the silence hang there, a calm void for her hysteria to echo into. He's here, he's in my living room, he's suing us for fraud. He's screaming that we're con artists, we'll be ruined. Leo, you have to fix this. You have to tell him this is some kind of mistake. I could picture it perfectly. Mr. Thorne, the tech entrepreneur who thought he'd bought himself a slice of coastal paradise. A man used to deals closing with a handshake and a wire transfer, now standing in my son's living room, his face purple with a fury born of financial insult. He wouldn't have yelled at his board members. He would have saved this particular brand of volcanic anger for the people he believed had made a fool of him, and he would have brought the documents. Evelyn's work, my work, the quiet title action, the Lien, the letter detailing in cold, unassailable legal prose that he owned a beautiful, useless box in the air. Sarah, I said, my voice level, almost quiet. It was the tone I'd used decades ago in negotiation rooms when the other side was on the verge of crumbling. It was a tone that demanded silence, and after a choked sob, she gave it to me. You sold a house, I began, each word a carefully placed stone. You took a structure, a collection of wood and glass and memories, and you sold it. You presented a check, you signed papers, you maximized your assets. I let the corporate jargon she'd used in my own kitchen hang in the air between us, now stripped of its power, sounding hollow and foolish. But you did not own the land. You never asked about the land. You just assumed. There was a beat of silence on the other end. It wasn't a thoughtful silence. It was the silence of a system overloading, of gears grinding to a halt. I could almost hear the frantic, scrambling recalculations happening in her mind. She was replaying every interaction, every smug comment, every condescending pat on the head she'd given the sentimental old man. She was searching for the flaw in her logic, the loophole she'd missed. And then it came, the realization. It didn't dawn, it crashed over her like a physical wave. I heard her breath catch, a sharp, pained intake of air. The deed, she whispered, the hysteria gone, replaced by a dawning, terrifying clarity. You had the deed. You always had the deed. I built my life on that land before I built the house, Sarah, I said. A man doesn't forget something like that. The foundation of her arrogant world didn't just crack, it dissolved. It fell into the legal quicksand I had been patiently, meticulously creating around her. All her plans, her ventures, her condescending certainty that she was the smartest person in any room. It was all built on sand. My sand. And I had just pulled the rug, the floor, and the very earth out from under her. You set a trap, she breathed, her voice now small and broken. This whole time, you were just waiting. I didn't confirm or deny. The truth was its own answer. She wasn't dealing with a feeble grandfather lost in his memories. She had been dealing with a predator she never knew was in the room. Leo the Landman, Volkov. A ghost from a past she'd never bothered to learn about. I had been a relic to her, a storybook character. Now, the story had a different ending, one I had written. He's going to destroy us, she said, the fight completely gone from her, replaced by a flat, hopeless terror. He's not going to destroy Mark, I said, and it was the first piece of forward-looking information I offered, a single stark fact in the wreckage. That was never the plan. I heard a muffled cry, and then the line went dead. She had dropped the phone. I slowly placed the receiver back in its cradle. The study was quiet again. Outside a bird was singing. The sun was still shining. But in a living room a few miles away, an empire of arrogance had just collapsed into dust. And the silence on my end of the phone was the sound of a battle already won. The silence in my study was different now. It wasn't the empty quiet of a house too big for one man, nor was it the tense stillness before a storm. This was the quiet after the detonation, when the dust has settled and all that's left is to survey the landscape of what you've done. The legal machinery, once set in motion by Evelyn and me, moved with a terrifying, beautiful precision. It was like watching a masterfully designed clock, every gear, every spring, performing its exact function. Mr. Thorne, the tech entrepreneur who had bought a beautiful, useless box from my daughter-in-law, was not a stupid man. He was a pragmatist. His lawsuit against Sarah and Mark for fraud wasn't about vengeance. It was about recovering his massive financial loss. When Evelyn presented him with the alternative, a simple, clean, quitclaim deed from me, granting him full and legal ownership of the land for $1, his rage instantly redirected. Why chase two people who were clearly judgment-proof for the rest of their lives when he could have the solution handed to him on a silver platter? I signed the deed without ceremony. The pen felt no heavier than any other. That single piece of paper, that nominal fee, cost me nothing. The land had never been about money. It had been about memory, about a promise made to a woman I loved more than my own breath. Giving it to Thorne was a strategic move, a gesture that appeared benevolent, but was, in its heart, the final calculated move in a game only I knew we were playing. It severed the last legal tether they had to my life, to Lena's memory. And in doing so, it accomplished one thing I hadn't even fully admitted to myself I wanted. It saved my son. Mark would not be financially ruined. He would not be buried under a mountain of debt because of his wife's avarice. He would be free to fail or succeed on his own merits, not shackled to a catastrophe of someone else's making. That was the single thread of fatherly love that remained, a thread I quietly, secretly, wove into the fabric of my retaliation. The collapse of their marriage was not a surprise. It was an inevitability I had engineered, a structure built on a foundation of Sarah's naked ambition, and Mark's profound passivity could not withstand the earthquake I had triggered. The pressure revealed every fissure, every weakness. I heard about it not from them, but in the clipped, efficient tones Evelyn used to inform me that Sarah had retained a divorce attorney. There was no drama, no final confrontation at my doorstep. Their world, the one they had been so sure was the future, simply imploded from the inside out. It was a week later when Mark finally came to see me. He stood on my porch, looking like a boy who had lost his way, home. The confident, if silent man who had stood behind Sarah was gone, replaced by a hollowed-out version, shoulders slumped with a shame so heavy I could almost feel its weight from where I sat in my armchair. He didn't come inside, he just stood in the doorway, the spring air feeling like a wall between us. "Dad," he began, his voice a ragged whisper. He couldn't meet my eyes. He stared at a point somewhere on the floor between us, at the worn spot on the rug where Lena's favorite chair used to be. "I'm sorry." The words hung there, simple and utterly inadequate. I should have stopped her. I just looked at him. I didn't offer a chair, I didn't offer a drink, I didn't offer the absolution he was so desperately seeking. I simply let the silence stretch, let him stand in the full, uncomfortable truth of his own failure. What was there to say? That it was okay? It wasn't. That I forgave him? I wasn't sure I could, or even if that was the point. My love for him was a complicated, wounded thing now, a gnarled old tree that had survived a lightning strike. It was still alive, but it would never look the same again. His apology was for not stopping the sale. But the deeper betrayal, the one that truly cut, was that he had forgotten who I was. He had allowed his wife to reduce me to a sentimental old fool, a man to be managed and placated, my history and my capabilities erased from his memory. My silence over the years, my contentment in my garden, had been mistaken for weakness. My greatest failure as a father was that I had raised a son who could so easily believe that. He left soon after, the unspoken words between us thicker than any we had said. The victory was mine. The beach house was back in my possession in its entirety. The structure, and once the deal with Thorne was finalized, the land. I had protected Lena's legacy. I had proven that the Landman was not a relic, but a force of nature that could not be dismissed. But sitting there in the deepening twilight, the house was just a house again. It was empty. The victory was necessary. It was just, but it was hollow. I had won a war against my own family, and the prize was a silence that echoed with the ghosts of everything I had lost along the way. The salt air is different now. It's not the air of memory, thick with ghosts and what-ifs. It's just air, clean, fresh. I'm sitting on the porch of the beach house, in the same chair I built for Lena 40 years ago. It creaks a little under my weight, a familiar sound. The for sale sign is gone. The scar in the lawn where it stood has already healed over, filled in with new grass. I didn't keep the house. That was the first thing people asked me. After everything, after the legal war and the quiet, brutal victory, surely I would keep it. It was the prize, the reclaimed fortress. But that's not what it was. It was a home. And a home needs a family living in it, filling its rooms with noise and life and future memories. Not one old man sitting alone with the echoes of the past. Keeping it would have been a different kind of loss, a monument to a battle instead of a testament to a life. So I sold it. Not to the highest bidder in a frenzy of offers. I was patient. I waited for the right people. A young couple, engineers, with a little girl who couldn't have been more than 4. They came for a viewing, and I watched them from this very porch. He had his hand on the small of her back, just like I used to with Lena. The little girl ran straight for the water's edge, her parents calling her back with laughter, not fear. They saw the house not as an asset, but as a foundation. For them it was the beginning of their story, not the end of mine. We settled on a price, the true market value, not a penny more or less. It felt clean. It felt right. The money from the sale is gone now, in a way. It's in a trust, a vault with my grandchildren's names on it. Their college, their first homes, a safety net for a life I hope they get to build on their own terms. It's insulated, locked away from their parents. That was Evelyn's final piece of ruthless legal architecture. The money is safe from Sarah's ambition, and more importantly, from Mark's weakness. It's a legacy, but it's not the one they tried to take from me. It's a new one, built from the ashes of the old. Speaking of Mark, he calls now. Not often, and the conversations are still clumsy, filled with long pauses where neither of us knows what to say. But he calls. He's renting a small apartment in the city, working a job he found on his own. He's rebuilding his life, board by board, and for the first time in a long time, he's using his own tools. There's shame there, a deep, lingering humiliation that I know will take years to fade. I don't absolve him of it. That's his burden to carry, his foundation to repair. But he's trying. He's learning to stand on his own. And for a father, that's all you can really hope for after the ground has given way. I take a slow breath, the sea breeze cool in my lungs. The silence here is peaceful again. But it's a different peace than the one I had before all this had started. That old peace was fragile, built on the avoidance of old instincts, on the quiet hope that the past would just stay buried. This new silence, this is earned. It's the deep, resonant quiet that settles over a field after a terrible storm has passed. You can still see where the lightning struck. You can still feel the memory of the thunder in your bones, but the air is clear. The danger is gone. The land is scoured clean. This peace is respected, not just by me, but by the world. It's a peace that knows its own strength. It's the quiet of a man who has been to the edge of himself, who had to reach back into the darkest parts of who he used to be to protect the man he became, and has now laid those old weapons back to rest, knowing exactly where they are if they're ever needed again. It's not the peace of forgetting, it's the peace of knowing. I look out at the horizon, where the sea meets the sky in a seamless, endless line, and for the first time in a very long time, I feel no pull from the past, and no fear for the future. There is just this moment, this chair, this breath, and it is enough. They think sentiment is a weakness. I've seen it my whole life. In the cutthroat world of real estate development, they'd see a man who cared about a piece of land, not just for its value, but for its history, for the old oak tree his grandfather planted, and they'd see an opening, a flaw in the armor. They'd move in, thinking that love for a place made you soft, made you slow. They were wrong then, and my daughter-in-law was catastrophically wrong now. She looked at my grief for Lena, at my quiet life in my garden, and she saw a man who had been declawed. She saw sentiment, and she mistook it for surrender. She saw me holding onto a house full of memories, and thought it was the act of a feeble old man clinging to ghosts. What she didn't see was the foundation, not just the physical one I poured with my own hands, mixing concrete until my arms ached, but the foundation of a life. A lifetime of acquiring skills, of understanding systems, of learning how to build and, when necessary, how to dismantle. Sentiment wasn't my weakness, it was my fortress. It was the very reason I had the will to fight with a precision and patience that someone driven purely by greed could never comprehend. They mistake silence for surrender. For months I said nothing. I let her believe she had won. I listened to her talk about maximizing assets and moving on, and I just nodded. I was the quiet man in the corner, the one they stopped seeing after a while. They think your silence means you've accepted their new reality. They don't realize you're just waiting for them to finish building their house on your land. They get so confident, so sure of their victory, that they stop watching you. They forget to ask the important questions. They never stop to consider that the quiet man isn't just remembering the past. He's the one who wrote the rules they're so clumsily trying to break. I didn't come out swinging. I didn't shout or make threats. That's what they expect. That's the drama they're prepared for. I did something far more devastating. I went to the rulebook, the one I helped write, metaphorically speaking, over a career of navigating the most Byzantine property laws imaginable. I went back to first principles, ad coelum, to the heavens, to the depths. The most fundamental rule of all, She sold the house, but she never owned the dirt it stood on. She never even thought to ask. In her arrogant haste, in her belief that my silence was weakness, she built her entire plan on a legal fault line. And I just had to wait for the right moment to apply the slightest pressure for the whole thing to collapse. This wasn't about revenge, not really. It was about restoration. It was about proving that a legacy, the things you build with your own hands and heart, is not a commodity to be traded. It is a testament. It has a weight. It has rights. It demands respect. You protect what's yours, not with brute force, but with a deeper understanding. You protect it with knowledge they don't possess, and with a resolve they cannot fathom. You protect it because, if you don't, it will be chipped away, sold off, and forgotten by people who see the world only in terms of profit and loss. So, my final thought to you is this. Never underestimate the quiet man in the corner, the one who seems to be lost in thought, who seems detached from the frantic energy of the deal-making and the strategizing. He isn't checked out. He's assessing. He's remembering not just the good times, but every battle he ever fought, every rule he ever learned, every lesson that life carved into him. His silence is not emptiness. It is potential energy. And when he decides to act, it won't be an emotional outburst. It will be a surgical strike, executed with a cold, clean finality that leaves no room for argument. He will use the very system you think you understand to show you that you understand nothing at all. Protect what's yours. Build your fortresses not just of wood and stone, but of knowledge and resolve. And never, ever mistake a man's love for something as a sign of his weakness. It is almost always the source of his greatest strength.